Look deep into nature and understand everything better. That's what Albert Einstein once said, and as I make more of these videos, you'll see how that comment is becoming increasingly relevant as we move ahead in our understanding of health. Now, this is my second take of this video. The first one I did, as usual, at lunchtime down at the beach at Byron, but for those of you who have been watching the weather around Northern Rivers, you'll know the storms we've been having, and there was almost no beach. Well, there was beach where I was, but the tide was up so high with a lot of debris, and still a really wild tide, and it was really windy. And even with a mic on today, for a change, the sound was still really poor. So I'm doing take 2 down in a walk near my home, which actually get to walk past lots of oyster farms, and I think you can see one, might be able to see one behind me there, just over in the bay. And I'll do a video next week or sooner about the world movement towards improved oyster farming and seaweed farming as sustainable foods for the planet, which make use of the ocean, which 70% of the earth is ocean, which 70% of our bodies are water. Strange coincidence. And of course, the beauty about oyster farming is that you don't have to feed them anything. Oysters feed on phytoplankton from the ocean, so it's not like salmon farming where you have to feed them food they wouldn't normally eat. They require no feeding. And seaweed is an extraordinary nutrient, as you know from me doing my seaweed foraging. So we've had incredible storms in the Northern Rivers area, which has been quite good for my garden. Although a lot of my garden is cacti, particularly aloe vera, which obviously doesn't love lots of water. But interestingly, the other big one I have is dragon fruit, and that's an amazing succulent or cactus, I'm not sure which one. It's a tropical one, so it does like the water, and my yellow dragon fruit are, for the first time, starting to come into fruit, so I'm very excited about that. Also got a lot of sapote, a lot of figs, a lot of pomegranates, and grapefruit. Those would be the main things I grow because they seem to grow well on my property. So that's what's been happening in the Northern Rivers area. A lot of storms, a lot of destruction to the beach. It's been real nature at its massive fury. But I really want to talk about 3 things today, 3 quick things. 2 of them about the microbiome, 1 about vitamin D. So if you're interested in the microbiome, you're interested in how the microbiome affects mood and risk of cancer, and if you're interested in vitamin D, why I think it's best to get from the sun, interested in Bitcoin, keep watching. Hang on for the musical break. Right, let's get started. Okay, so the first study from this week was a study on the microbiome and endocannabanoids. So it turns out that chronic stress damages the microbiome of the gut. Now stress, short-term stress, is quite good for Homo sapiens. The concept's called phronesis, which even a toxic substance in very small amount or a small amount of stress for a short time is actually quite good for Homo sapiens. It's quite like going to a gym and working out hard for 30 minutes. That's good for you. Going to gym and working out hard for 24 hours, not so good. You're going to pay for that later on. So chronic stress that we're all under now is one of the factors which is causing problems with our microbiome. And it turns out then that the microbiome is responsible for chemicals in the body called endocannabanoids. The chemicals in the body which interact with the same receptors in the brain that THC from cannabis interacts with. So we make our own endocannabanoids, and those are impaired if our gut microbiome is impaired. So what we've discovered is that chronic stress damages the microbiome, and that damaged microbiome inhibits the production of endocannabanoids, which then predispose us to depression. So one of the ways to maximize your mood is to make sure that you optimize your microbiome. And of course we know now from scientific studies that sunlight directly on the abdomen is one of the ways of optimizing the diversification of the microbes in our gut. Now the second study was also interesting, because now we know that not only is there a microbiome of organisms on our skin, not only a microbiome of organisms in our intestinal tracts, but almost all organs have their own microbiome now that we've discovered ways of identifying organisms that we didn't have before. And we found out that we know that a microbiome in one place is good for you. The microbiome keeps us free of other pathogens, but that same microbiome, if it gets translocated or moved to another area of the body, is bad for you. So it's like having a guard dog at your place which is friendly. Well, that's great, but it might not be friendly if it goes to somebody else's place. That's called translocation of the microbiome. But anyway, what we discovered was a healthy microbiome of the mouth dramatically reduced the risk of lung cancer. So again, one of our focus on health is always optimizing the microbiome of those organisms. And I'll talk in the future about ways of optimizing the microbiome. And the third thing that I want to talk about was vitamin D. And interestingly, what we've discovered is that vitamin D that is produced by the sun with the action of UVB light on our skin, which activates the vitamin D, that has an intrinsic feedback loop, which means that as the vitamin D levels increase because of sun exposure, it switches off the activation process once the vitamin D levels get optimized, because you don't want too much of anything. You don't want too little of something, you don't want too much of something. That includes vitamin D. So this body has this feedback loop, so I'll walk past the down branches, has this feedback loop where once we've developed enough activated vitamin D, it stops activating it from the sunlight. Now you don't get that when you take vitamin D supplements, which is kind of a reference to the Albert Einstein quote. That once you understand some of the miracles of nature, you can see how intelligent the wisdom of the body is and how in harmony with nature it is. And so the message from that is that the body has this intrinsic intelligence with sunlight, which we evolved for billions of years, and the production of vitamin D. And that then goes on and is a reference to Bitcoin, because one of the things that people ask me a lot about Bitcoin, I got to get out of the sun. I love the sun, now I'm getting out of it. What's up with that? There we go, this would be better. Coming up to some oyster farms. One of the things about Bitcoin that people ask me is they say, well, you keep on talking about how Bitcoin is a defense against hyperinflation and excessive printing, but if Bitcoin is rewarded to miners for recording transactions on the blockchain, there's one of the oyster farms down here just behind me, making use of the ocean, don't have to feed it, raising oysters in their natural environment. They just usually grow on rocks or other oysters, so it's very natural oyster farming. So if Bitcoin is rewarded to miners for recording transactions on the Bitcoin blockchain and Bitcoin gets busier and busier, aren't there going to be more Bitcoin created and rewarded to the miners? Because that's what happens with gold. As the price of gold goes up, gold miners are incentivized, that's a good word, gold miners are incentivized to produce more gold to take an opportunity for the increased prices, but then the price starts to come down as gold starts to flood the market. So why doesn't it happen with Bitcoin? Well, that was the genius of the Bitcoin software development by Satoshi Nakamoto, that it has this built-in mechanism that when the blockchain gets busier, it becomes harder to win the lottery to be the miner who records the transaction. So as the blockchain gets busier, the rewards go down. As the blockchain reduces in activity, the rewards go up because the lottery becomes easier to win. It's a once in a lifetime genius protocol. So thanks for watching. What did we learn today? We learned that reducing stress is important for our microbiome, and our microbiome is important to keep us happy because it produces endocannabanoids, which interact with receptors in our brain, which THC reacts to. It's also important to keep the microbiome of the mouth healthy to reduce our risk of lung cancer, and it's important to understand how vitamin D from the sun has an intrinsic feedback loop to make sure the vitamin D levels don't get too high and become toxic, and that's reflected in the Bitcoin blockchain, where also there is this genius bit of software which has this intrinsic feedback loop, making sure that we don't get, it's a beautiful monarch butterfly behind me, oh, it's just flown off. We don't get excessive amounts of Bitcoin produced. You can see there's some more trees down here on the track, blocking my way from the storms. Anyway, that's all I've got to say today. Thanks for listening. Peace and love. Hopefully the weather in Northern Rivers gets better soon. Catch you in a few days with a new video. Bye.